I opened my front door, coffee mug in hand, prepared to enjoy the gentle morning light illuminating my flower beds. Instead, I was confronted with a scene of devastation, not merely a disordered yard or a few crushed petals, but a complete massacre. My once VY Brant petunias lay shredded, resembling confetti strewn across a child's birthday party. Their roots protruded into the air like botanical debris, wooden stakes broken in half like discarded toothpicks, and decorative stones scattered as if they had attempted to escape. The air carried the heavy scent of fresh soil and treachery. At the center of this chaos lay a single rubber glove, bright orange, small, left-handed. This was no random act, it was a declaration of war. For a moment, I stood motionless, clutching my coffee mug so tightly that the ceramic groaned under the pressure. My flower beds had been my sanctuary, my pride, my quiet defiance against the rigid uniformity imposed by our Homeowners Association, HOA. Each petunia had been planted with care, every tulip given a name. This was not the work of animals or mischievous children. It was deliberate, meticulous, spiteful. And I knew precisely who was responsible. I strode to my garage, opened the security system's side panel, and retrieved the footage. Skipping through the uneventful midnight hours, I paused when the screen flickered briefly before revealing a grainy figure in a tracksuit slinking across my lawn at 2:11 a.m. Armed with a flashlight in one hand and a garden trowel in the other, she moved stealthily, like a vengeful predator. She uprooted the first row of tulips with unrestrained fury, stuffing them into a trash bag as if they had personally offended her. Then she performed a smug, triumphant shuffle, not a dance, but a gloating gesture of malice. It was Margaret. Margaret was no ordinary neighbor. She was the HOA president, the enforcer of hedge symmetry, the extinguisher of dualisha woman whose essence seemed to carry the faint whiff of dried ink and self-righteousness. Last year, she had fined me for non-compliant wind chimes. She once penalized my neighbor, Ellen, for an excessively playful mailbox. Margaret patrolled our streets like a self-appointed overseer of suburban perfection, but this act transcended her usual pettiness into outright madness. Still in my slippers, I drove to the HOA Officia bland beige trailer near the clubhouse, furnished with the same uninspired decor she deemed acceptable. Gray walls, a lone artificial plant, and a poster proclaiming, "Harmony begins with rules." Margaret sat behind her desk, her pencil skirt impeccably pressed, her severe bun flawless. "You vandalized my garden," I stated, skipping pleasantries. Her smile was as taut as a drumhead. "Your unauthorized landscaping violates Section 4B of the HOA Code." "Section 4B doesn't exist," I countered. "It does now," she replied coolly. "We added it at the last meeting. You can't retroactively invent rules to justify a felony. The fines have been issued. Removing the plants yourself saved us the effort." I nearly lost my composure. "You dug them up with your own hands." She leaned back, arms crossed, exuding the confidence of a storybook violin. "The HOA has the authority to enforce compliance. If you disagree, raise it at the next board meeting." The next meeting conveniently staffed by her sister, her ex-husband, and her accountant. The last time someone challenged her, she fined them for civil emotional defiance. That evening, I sat on my back porch, staring at my ravaged garden. It resembled a war zone. Even the gnome that once held a tiny rake had been beheaded, its ceramic head left atop my mailbox as a warning. As I gazed at the wreckage, my neighbor, Mrs. Harper, approached with a tray of lemon squares. "Margaret got you too?" she asked softly, glancing at the ruins. "She murdered my tulips," I replied. "She drowned my roses with weed killer last summer," claimed they disrupted HOA uniformity. "I haven't replanted since." Stunned, I asked, "Why didn't you report her?" "I did," she sighed. "She fined me for false accusations and emotional distress." We sat in silence, the shared weight of Margaret's tyranny settling between us. Then Mrs. Harper patted my hand. "Some people crave control, but don't let her win. Find a way to fight back." That night, brushing my teeth, I reflected on the absurd HOA violations I'd witnessed. A man fined for a mismatched patio chair, a teenager forced to repaint her purple bike gray, a Halloween skeleton removed for being inappropriately positioned. This wasn't a community, it was a fiefdom, and Margaret was its dictator. But she didn't anticipate my next move. I assembled a teen mall, eccentric, resourceful, and we were about to transform her oppression into a spectacle. If she wanted to uproot my garden, we'd plant something she couldn't easily destroy, a rebellion fortified by creative white tie and legal flair. The following morning, I met with Tom, a sarcastic former attorney who lived 3 houses down and mowed his lawn in sandals just to irk Margaret. He listened to my plan over coffee, then grinned. You want to combat despotism with garden gnomes? Legal-themed garden gnomes, I clarified, armed with lawsuits. He set his mug down. I'm in. We were going to craft art, make a statement, and force Margaret to reconsider every choice that led her to annihilate my tulips. Her fabricated HOA rules couldn't suppress revenge. Tom arrived with serious donuts, not a polite gesture but fuel for strategy, like a general's battle maps. We gathered around my kitchen table with Ellen, a retired art teacher with a flair for drama and a simmering resentment beneath her soft sweaters, and Victor, a community theater set designer who once built a life-sized pirate ship from cardboard. We were the perfect blend of defiance and ingenuity for what lay ahead. So, let me get this straight, Ellen said, stirring her tea with the intensity of a conjurer. You want to plant an army of garden gnomes in Margaret's yard, legal-themed gnomes? Miniature barristers, I confirmed. Prosecutorial pixies, each holding lawsuit scrolls. Victor leaned in. Can they talk? Tom raised an eyebrow. Talking gnomes? I have a dozen motion sensor voice boxes from a haunted house fundraiser, Victor explained. We can program them to say anything. Ellen clapped delightedly. This is theater. Protest art. I produced a notebook filled with sketches, phrases, and legal jargon. Each gnome would be unique, one clutching a tiny subpoena, another pointing forward like Uncle Sam with, I sue you, a third wielding a gavel. Our masterpiece would be a Margaret doppelganger, same severe haircut and pinched expression, holding a mirror inscribed with violator of community spirit. Tom scrutinized the mock lawsuits. These aren't real, but the legalese is convincing enough to baffle anyone. Violation of plant rights, first degree, pansy plucking clause 7 of the Garden Gnome Geneva Convention. It's menacingly absurd. Victor nodded. They need tiny suits. No point in legal gnomes without the attire. One with a briefcase? Ellen suggested. Briefcases, ties, glassware, sparing no detail. For 2 weeks, we worked late into the night, painting, wiring, and laughing until tears flowed. My garage resembled a courtroom fused with a toy shop. Tom drafted ridiculous legal documents. Victor built miniature benches and podiums, and Ellen painted eyes so VYVYD they could guilt-trip a statue. We even added a gnome stenographer, typing furiously on a tiny typewriter. Our piece de resistance, motion-activated gnomes. Victor fine-tuned the sensors to trigger only when someone approached, programming them to shout, I object. Cease and desist this landscaping. And you have been served. Deployment night buzzed with anticipation. Dressed in black like floral commandos, Ellen insisted on a beret and scarf for dramatic effect. Tom brought his law degree as a precaution. Margaret's yard was immaculate, grass clipped to precision, hedges sculpted into cubes. We moved stealthily, placing gnomes along her walkway, flower beds, mailbox, and porch, securing their bases into the soil. As a final flourish, we positioned the Margaret look-alike gnome in the center of her lawn, mirror gleaming, facing the street. We didn't speak much on the walk back. The act felt almost ceremonial, like laying a meticulously dressed curse. At dawn, a piercing scream shattered the quiet, followed by a furious bellow. I raced to my driveway just in time to see Margaret, bathrobe-clad and slipper-shod, standing amid her gnome-infested yard. What is the meaning of this? She yelled, arms flailing. She grabbed a gnome, triggering Tom's voice. You are in violation of Section 7, improper treatment of decorative fauna. She dropped it as if scalded. Another activated. This yard is under legal surveillance. Margaret unraveled, seizing a broom to sweep them away, but they held firm. Neighbors emerged, one filming. I will not be mocked, she shrieked. This is an attack on the HOA. Better than the HOA attacking us, someone muttered across the street. Margaret stormed inside, returning with her infamous clipboard, a neighborhood symbol of menace, but it looked feeble now. That afternoon, a notice hit every mailbox. Unlawful yard ornaments constitute defacement of community harmony. She'd invented another rule overnight. Yet something had shifted. Neighbors weren't cowed. They were amused. By evening, gnomes sprouted across lawns, tiny ones, large ones, some with gavels. one with a donut. Tom placed a gnome on his roof holding a sign, "Due process, not HOA distress." That night, Ellen brought wine. "You started something," she said. I gazed at the gnome-dotted neighborhood, glowing under porch lights. "I just wanted my flowers." "Nope," she replied. "You wanted dignity and gnome justice." Margaret retaliated fiercely. 2 days later, a citation arrived, sealed with a red sticker and dense legalese, accusing me of aggravated neighborhood disruption, psychological vandalism, and visual hostility. The fine, due law $1,500, due in 7 days, her face, escalated enforcement. A second citation alleged unauthorized humor on community property. I was drafting a scathing response when Tom burst in, phone in hand. "She's famous," he exclaimed. "Who?" "Margaret, look." He showed me a video of her battling the gnomes, broom swinging, their legal taunts echoing. Posted by a teen, Tyler, to a local forum, it had exploded on TikTok. HOA Margaret versus the Gnome Army, with 2 million views. Comments cheered us on, suggesting gnome merchandise and animated shorts. Margaret had tried to crush flowers. Instead, she'd ignited a viral sensation. That afternoon, she called an emergency HOA meeting, plastering notices everywhere and threatening fines for non-attendance. I went, as did most neighbors, some sporting "I object" shirts. Margaret stood at the community center's front, clipboard in hand, like a warlord. "This meeting addresses the flagrant disorder infecting our community," she began, glaring at me. She ranted about CIVYC pride and banned non-HOA-approved yard decor, no gnomes, no flamingos, no joy, then pointed at me. "The instigator will be fined to the fullest extent of our charter." I raised my hand. "Which part of the charter permits sneaking into my yard at 2 a.m.? To destroy my tulips?" Murmurs rippled through the room. Before she could answer, Ellen displayed the footage. Margaret, tracksuit-clad, annihilating my garden. "Fake," Margaret snapped. "Edited. Deep fake AI." Tom stood. "You admitted it in writing landscape compliance enforcement. You're just mad you got caught." The crowd turned. Laughter and claps broke out. Margaret slammed her clipboard down. "This meeting is over," she barked, but it wasn't her call anymore. The next day, a local news reporter arrived, drawn by the viral video, to cover the Gnome Rebellion. I agreed to an interview on my porch, gnomes in the background, holding a sue me mug. I recounted the ordeal with calm wit and quiet frustration. Margaret declined comment, but posted a diatribe on the HOA site. When envy becomes weaponized. It backfired when a forum user uncovered receipts showing she'd spent HOA funds on her own landscaping imported stones, a koi pond. Tom and Ellen dug deeper, compiling a binder of shady transactions, fake contractors, emergency lawn symmetry adjustments. Titled Exhibit A, Margaret's Greatest Hits, we distributed copies neighborhood-wide. Margaret issued more fines and threats, but the tide had turned. Lawn chairs reappeared, kids rode bikes freely, the community was stirring. With Tom's legal expertise, I filed a lawsuit: property destruction, harassment, HOA abuse. 3 neighbors joined, their own grievances bolstering our case. The EVY dense footage, citations, financial records was ironclad, the gnomes, oddly compelling. When the certified letter reached Margaret, I pictured her reaction, a shriek of defeat. That night, her house went dark. No patrols, no posts, no porch light. I stood by my replanted, thriving garden, surrounded by smiling gnomes, and felt peace. But I knew it wasn't over. The courtroom was chilly, as if justice required preservation. I sat with Tom, dapper in a navy suit, a gnome with a briefcase on our table. Margaret sat opposite, stiff in a pristine blazer, her lawyer, rich, oozing arrogance. The judge, a no-nonsense woman, silenced the room with her presence. Tom opened. "Your Honor, we're here to defend a man's right to plant tulips and shield a neighborhood from weaponized pettiness." Chuckles erupted. Rich objected, claiming we mocked the case. The judge dismissed him. We presented the footage, citations, and Exhibit A. Neighbors testified: holiday lights banned, chalk erased under threat. Then Tom activated a gnome. "You have been served." The judge blinked but stayed stern. Rich argued defamation. Margaret exploded. "He made me a joke." The judge replied coolly, "You did that yourself." Her facade cracked. We won. Restitution, her resignation, ethics training. Outside, reporters swarmed. The story had gone statewide. I thanked the community, friends, and gnomes. At the Freedom from Tyranny barbecue, gnomes lined the streets, each uniquely adorned. Mrs. Harper toasted, even a tiny statue can stand against injustice. Margaret's house darkened. Soon, a for sale sign appeared. Rumors said she fled to Florida, possibly banned from HOAs. Months later, a letter Aravedno cinder, but her sharp handwriting unmistakable. Inside, a photo, a new neighborhood, a flowerless bed, one gnome with a mirror. Round 2, it read. I laughed. She hadn't changed, but I had no longer afraid. In my flourishing garden, I added a judge gnome, Justice Paul, as the sun set. This wasn't just about flowers or gnomes, it was about resisting petty tyranny with unity, creative vitae, and a touch of absurdity. If Margaret returned, the gnomes stood ready,